Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Marketing and Mindset with your host, Matt Miller. And today we have an episode all about adversity. So, what exactly is adversity? The definition is difficulties, semicolon, misfortune. So, either difficulties or misfortune that'll typically occur that we'll overcome. So, you often hear people overcoming adversity. So whenever we face difficulties or misfortune, it's always super important to cultivate a positive mindset. There's a lot of things that we can control, and there's also a lot of things that we can't control. So we always have to stay positive, focus on the things we can control, and then don't worry about the things that we cannot control. Before we go out and set a goal or write down something that we want to accomplish, it's very important that we go through a strategic planning phase, and a lot of that work should come up front. It should be preparation. And we'll have a step-by-step process that we need to follow in order to achieve that goal or reach that objective. So the planning phase is super important. But at some point, we have to take action. And when we take action, inevitably, there's going to be things that go wrong. So it's very important for us to be able to pivot, to make a change whenever adversity strikes. And ultimately, adversity is a good thing when we frame it in the right context. So there's a quote by Dieter Uchtdorf, and he said, "It is your reaction to adversity, not the adversity itself, that determines how your life story will develop." So it's not the thing that happens to us, but it's the meaning that we take from it. It's the meaning that we take from that adversity. And whatever we do with it at that point is what will determine how our life story will develop. If it was always easy, it would always get done. There's another quote: successful people are willing to do what unsuccessful people are not willing to do. So it's going to be difficult. There's going to be challenges that come up, but if we can deal with that adversity, we'll be going in the right direction. So now that I've talked about the definition of adversity, I want to give a personal story of how I've overcome a challenge and adversity. So a year ago from yesterday, my brother and my cousin ran a marathon. They ran it in Athens, Ohio. And I was there and I was spectating and I watched them run it. And I thought it was so cool. I love the environment. So I came home the next day and I told myself, a year from now, I'm going to sign up for this marathon with them and I'm going to run it. So I had that plan in my foresight from the very start. And I came up with a 4-month routine of how I was going to run this marathon. And every week was more and more and more in terms of mileage and duration. And eventually I got to a point throughout that 4-month period where I would set myself up that I had the endurance that I could run that marathon. However, the program was only 4 months, so I had to wait 8 months until actually doing the program of 4 months. So I took that 8 months and I just kind of shoved it off to the side, but I knew that I wanted to run this marathon. So I got to the point where there was 4 months up until the next marathon, and there was a little bit of prerequisite work that had to be done. It said you had to be able to run like a 5K. You had to be able to comfortably run like 3 miles. So that's when I started the 4-month out plan. And I started the first month and I was off to a really good start. I ended up doing my mileage. I ended up following the plan each day. It was about 4 to 5 days a week running, and you would increase your mileage every week. And I did that for 4 weeks and I had no problem. And then after that, I ran an 8-mile run and my foot started bothering me. So the next day I woke up and the foot was even worse. And it actually got worse and worse to a point where I couldn't even barely walk on it. And I was out for 4 weeks. So I took 4 weeks off. And then after that, I got back on the routine. But since I took 4 weeks off, but it set me back really far, and I would have to overcome that in order to be in shape to run that marathon. So then I got back into it, and after 4 weeks, I started running again. I ran for 2 weeks. And then after that 2 weeks, I was playing basketball, and I jumped up as high as I could, landed on somebody's foot, twisted my ankle, twisted it inward, heard a few pops, and I ended up fracturing my ankle. So now it was the same foot too. And I had another 2 to 8 weeks of recovery time there. And this was all in the peak of my marathon training. So I took off about 5 weeks. And then after that, there's only about a month left until the marathon. So I did what I could and I trained for those 4 weeks and I followed a routine. And then it got to a week before the marathon, and I just said, I'm not going to put any pressure on the foot. I'm going to let it heal up, and I would see if I could run the marathon when it came up. And then also, to backtrack a little bit, I did have an x-ray appointment. I did see a doctor. It was confirmed as a microfracture, and the doctor said that if it healed properly, then I could attempt to run the marathon if I didn't have any pain. So I got the second x-ray results after the first one a couple weeks later, and the doctor said it was healing really well. And she basically said, if you don't have pain in the ankle while you're running, you can push yourself, but if you feel pain, you need to stop. So then flash forward, I got to the point where it was the week before the marathon, and I took that week off, and I just did some incline walk and some other exercise routines. And then it came to the day where the actual marathon was. So I got to the marathon, and long story short, I ended up running the marathon. I ran all 26.2 miles. I did it in under 6 hours, which was the cutoff time. I did it in about 5.5, and I did it with very little ankle pain. There was no long-term pain, so it's something I was able to do, and the ankle actually felt pretty good. So the point of this story is I had to face a lot of adversity throughout my training routine. But I didn't just take the time off when I was injured. So the point I really want to drive home is I spent 4 weeks off that first time I injured my ankle, and then I spent another 4 weeks off when I had the microfracture. But during that time, sure, there was about a week or two period where I couldn't put weight on the foot, and I was very careful, but I got creative, I made pivots, I made changes. So instead of running, I did a lot of biking, and I did hours and hours of biking because that didn't hurt. And then I got creative and I started swimming, and I would swim for hours at a time. And although I couldn't run, I was still doing cardio that kept me up at a pace where I felt like if I were to run the marathon, then my cardio would be good. And then I started doing incline walk at a very quick pace, so I kept the heart rate up. So there's things I was doing to keep me in shape before the marathon came. And that was the key to it. So I had this plan, and obviously it was running every day, about 4 or 5 days a week for the 16-week period. And I wasn't able to follow that plan. There's some things I couldn't control. But what I did was I made that pivot and I started doing what I could control. And I did the best that I could do. And by doing that, it was good enough that I got to a point where I felt comfortable on the ankle and on the body and with cardio that I could actually run the marathon. And then at that point, I did it and it felt pretty good. So even though our initial plan is crushed, it doesn't mean that we can't consider alternatives to accomplish a goal. And although we set out a specific plan at the very beginning, we don't have to follow that plan step by step. There will be times when we have to overcome that adversity. So next time that you guys are in a situation where you'd face adversity, I encourage you to be creative, think of an alternative plan, and think of something else that you can do that might not directly align with what you originally thought, but it's something that'll lead you closer to potentially accomplish that goal. So thank you guys for listening, and we'll be back with another episode shortly.